நமஸ்தே. அகஜானன பத்மார்க்கம் கஜானனமஹர்நிஷம் அநேக கோட்டி பக்தானாம் ஏகதந்தமுபாஸ்மஹே. சுராசுரசேவித பாத பங்கஜ करे विराजत कमनीय पुस्तक विरिंचि पत्नी कमलासन स्थिता सरस्वती नृत्य तु वाचि मे सदा. ज्ञानानन्दमयं देवं निर्मलस्फटिकाकृतिम् आधारं सर्वविद्यानां हयग्रीवमुपास्महे. श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करम्. अपार करुणा सिन्धुं ज्ञानदं शान्तरूपिणं श्रीचन्द्रशेखर गुरुं प्रणमामि मुदान्वहम्. श्रीचन्द्रशेखर गुरुं प्रणमामि मुदान्वहम्. अरुणोदयमे அன்பின் வடிவமே அருணோதயமே அன்பின் வடிவமே அனையே பதம் என்றும் பணிவோம் அனையே பதம் என்று பணிவோம். அருமறைகள் போற்றும் ஆதிசக்தி நீ அருமறைகள் போற்றும் ஆதிசக்தி நீ அன்பர் எல்லாம் வாழ ஆளும் தயாபரி அன்பர் எல்லாம் வாழ ஆளும் தயாபரி. சரிக பத சனித பகரிகதப சரிக பத சனித பகரிகதப தனி பத கபரிக பத சரிக பத சனித பகரிகதப தனி த பத கபரிக பத சரிக பகரி சனி தரி கபதரி சனி த பகத சரிக நித பகரி சரிக பகரி சனி தரி கபதரி சனி த பகத சரிக நித பகரி அருணோதயமே அன்பின் வடிவமே. கருணே தெய்வம் கருணே தெய்வம் நீயே காத்தருளே கருணே தெய்வம் நீயே காத்தருளே கபத பரிக பகசரி கருணே தெய்வம் நீயே காத்தருளே கப தப கபரி கப சரி கரி கதப தசனி தப கப சபத சரி கருணே தெய்வம் சரி கப கரி கபத சனி த சரி கபத பக பரி கனி த பத கபத சரி கப கரி சனி தப கரி சனி தப கரி சனி தப சனி தப கனி தப கதப கருணே தெய்வம் நீயே காத்தருளே சா கக பத த சானி தப கரி ச ரிக சரி கப ரிக பத கபத ச கக பத த சானி தப கரி ச ரிக சரி கப ரிக பத கபத சனி த கனி தப ரிக தப க சரி க சரி க சனி த கனி தப ரிக தப க சரி க சரி க gapa da pa gapa ri ga ni da pa da ga pa da sa ri ga gapa da pa gapa ri ga ni da pa da sa ri ga pa di pa ga di sa da sa ni da pa ri ga pa ga sa ri karune devam ni காத்தருளே கருணை தெய்வம் நீயே Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaskaram. My name is Arun Kaushik. It's my pleasure to present the second part in this multi-part series on Shri Lalita Sahasranamam. Last time in the first part, we looked at the divine form of Shri Lalitamba as Sindhuraruna Vigraham, the one with the reddish hue, or as we just heard Padma Bhushan Shri Lalgudi Ji Jayaraman put it in his Bauli Varnam, Arunodayame Anbin Vadivame. Arunodayame Anbin Vadivame, the one whose red hue comes from her love and grace. We also looked at her abode at the center of the Meru Malai, the Meru mountain, Sumeru Madhyashringastha, and her city, Srinagaram. And we left off with her as Kamakshi Kamadayini, the one who grants all desires. Today, we'll look at the how and the why of Devi taking the form of Lalitamba. We saw in the fourth Tiranamam, Chit Agni Kunda Sambhuta, which addresses the how, and in the fifth name, Devakarya Samudhyata, which is the why. So after the name Kamadayini, it gets into the section of the Sahasranamam, which is Lalitamba's war with Bhandasuran, which is basically the why, the Devakarya Samudhyata. But what we're going to do is actually skip just past this section to one Tiranamam, which really sets up today's story. Haranetragni Sandagda Kama Sanjeevanaushadhi, one who gave life to Kamadeva after he was burned by Shiva's third eye. This Tiranamam has anything and everything to do with Lalitambika. From why she took her avataram to why she holds some of the things that she does. I had mentioned in the first part that a lot of Lalitamba's appearance is tied to Kamadevan. And even in Shankaracharya's Saundarya Lahari, he describes many facets of Devi using Kamadeva. And in the Lalita Sahasranamam, we heard two names at least, Vadana Smaramangalya Grihatorana Chillika. Her eyebrows are the toranams, the garlands at the entrance of Kamadeva's house. And Indra Gopa Parikshipta Smaratuna Bhajangika. Her calves are like the arrow quivers of Kamadeva. Shankaracharya takes us to a whole new level in Saundarya Lahari and describes almost every facet of Ambal as Kamadevan. We'll start this story by focusing on the part a little bit morbid, but where Kamadevan is burned by Shivan and is left as a pile of ashes. Many of us know this to be the part of the story in the birth of Kartikeya, in the Kumara Shambhavam, the Kanda Puranam. In this part, the Devas are trying to bring Shiva and Shakti together so that they can create Kartikeya, so that they can give birth. When Shiva and Shakti are separate, Shrishti doesn't happen, creation doesn't happen. It's only when they're together that anything can happen, and we'll look at that later on, probably in the next session a little bit further. But they needed to bring forth Kartikeya so that he could slay Shurapadman, or Tarakasuran. The story of Lalitamba is almost like a parallel or a side story, or almost just like a divergent story from all of this, because it actually, when the story of Lalitamba ends, it brings us back to Kumara Shambhavam. So eventually in the story of Murugan or Kartikeyan, we get to Shiva Parvati's wedding, sometimes known as Meenakshi Sundareshwara Kalyana, Meenakshi Tirmanam. During all of this, Kamadeva remains as a pile of ash while his wife Rati mourns his loss. Then one day, one of Shiva's ganas by the name Chitrakarma takes the ashes and constructs a beautiful figure of a man from the ashes. Chitrakarma, pleased with his work, places the figure in front of Shivan and it immediately springs to life. The boy, now brought to life, studies under Chitrakarma and conducts immense tapas and eventually gains the fortune of a boon from Parameshwaran, Sri Shivan. The boon which he asks is, half the strength of my foes should be transferred and added to mine, and let it be so that none of their weapons can harm me. To which all the ganas chanted, Banda Banda, Banda Banda, which means good, good, good fortune. And that's how he was bestowed with the name Banda. Now, how did Banda become Bandasuran? How did he become an Asuran? He was born in Kailayam, he was born under a Gana, he was born, given life by Shiva. How did he become an Asura? He was born of the ashes of the god of desire, struck down by the wrath and anger of Shiva, and then was imbibed with a powerful boon. Once someone is granted a boon or anything that ensures success, it's then that one's true nature comes out. And you think about how each Ashura rose to power: Ravanan, Shurapadman, Mahishasuran, any Asuran. They started off as very learned students and pious devotees. If not, they would not have even gotten a boon from Deva, be it Brahma or Shiva. Without having jnanam or some sort of bhakti, they would not have been able to get a boon. Chumma, I mean, the Devas don't grant boons for no reason. I mean, Ravana himself sung the Samavedam at Kailasham. What more can you say? But once they were ensured power, that's when things fell apart. We see that even in our society today, right? Even a promotion or a slight increase in power can change someone for the worse. You know, in a lot of these old office sitcoms, there'll be 3 or 4 friends. They all work together. They're all on the same level. They share a cube. They share the workspace, and they're all friends. All of a sudden, one of them will get promoted, and the whole dynamic shifts, right? The one who gets promoted starts to become more aloof, starts to kind of treat the rest as lower, and then invariably one of the old friends will say, "You've changed, man," and all of that, right? It's that dynamic, that increase in power, and what a person does with it that really shows their true nature. And the fact that the anger from Shiva was imbibed within him eventually came forth and brought Bhandasuran out from Banda. Under the guidance of Shukracharya, Bandasura built his capital and established his empire. And much like every other Asura, he starts to torment the Devas and starts to gain more control of Devalogam. Indra, taking advice from sage Narada, went to the slopes of the Himalaya mountains along with all the other Devas to conduct a penance to Parashakti. Bandasuran tried to perturb or disturb the penance in the Devas, but he was foiled by Parashakti, who protected them during their efforts. The Devas decided that mere penance wasn't enough, so they would host a Mahayagnyam. They would perform a Mahayagnyam. And all the while, they prayed and prayed for just one thing. Rave Parvata Raja Kumari Rave Parvata Raja Kumari Rave Parvata Raja Kumari Devi Nanu Brochutaku Vegamera Parvata Raja Kumari Devi ನಾನು ಬ್ರೋಚುಟಕು ವೇಗಮೆರವೇ ಪರ್ವತ ರಾಜಕುಮಾರಿ ದೇವಿ ನಾನು ಬ್ರೋಚುಟಕು ವೇಗಮೆರವೇ ಪರ್ವತ ರಾಜಕುಮಾರಿ ನೀವೇ ಗತಿಯನಿ ನಮ್ಮಿಯುಂಟಿಗದ ನೀವೇ ನಮ್ಮಿಯುಂಟಿನಿಗದ ನೀವೇ ನೌಮಿಯುಳ್ಟಿನಿಗದ ನೀವೇ ಗತಿಯನಿ ನೌಮಿಯುಳ್ಟಿಗದ ನೀವೇ ಗತಿಯನಿ ನೌಮಿಯುಳ್ಟಿಗದ ನೀವೇ ಗತಿಯನಿ ನೌಮಿಯುಳ್ಟಿಗದ ನಾ ಮುರಳಿಡಗ ಜಪವೋ ಮಾತಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವೇ ಗತಿಗನಿ ನೌಮಿಯುಳ್ಟಿಗದ ನಾ ಮುರಳಿಡಗ ಜಪವೋ ಮಾತಲ್ಲಿರವೇ ಪರ್ವತ ರಾಜಕುಮಾರಿ ದೇವಿ ನಾನು ಬ್ರೋಚುಟಕು ವೇಗಮೆರವೇ ಪರ್ವತ ರಾಜಕುಮಾರಿ The Devas prayed, Rave Vegame Rave Parvata Rajakumari. Come fast, daughter of the mountains. This is what Shama Shastri sings in one of his Meenakshi Navabhakta Kritis. Pleased with their sacrifice, Parashakti burst forth from the fire in the form of Lalitambika. Shining with the red glow of the sun, we saw a lot of Tirunamams like this, Sindura Aruna Vigraham, in Saundari Lahariyam, Jagatratam Karuna Kachit Aruna, Sarva Arunana Vadrangi. We saw all these names pertaining to her red color. And actually what happens the minute Lalitamba arises, everything happens very, very quickly up to the war. So upon seeing her beauty, Brahma was worried about finding a suitable groom. So no sooner did he finish this thought, did Parameshwaran assume the beautiful form of Kameshwaran, one who embodied and brought about the desire or Kama within Lalitamba. Their marriage was celebrated with great pomp and great speed, and then immediately Lalita goes to Srinagaram. They do a quick pattabhishekam. Why is everything so quick? It's because Devakari Samudita, she's here to slay Bandasuran. So all of these are just formalities that have to be done before slaying Bandasuran. Shiva Shakti have to unite. She needs a place to establish herself, establish her army. But all of this has to happen quickly so that the war can commence. So basically with all this done, Shiva Shakti are united, Lalitamba, Kameshwaran. And we saw in the last time with interactions between Shiva and Shakti within the Lalita Sahasranamam, a lot of times Shiva will be referred to as Kameshwaran. So with that united, with the kingdom established, Srinagaram, Shripuram, it was time to go to war. So our last part ended at Kamakshi Kamadayini Devarshi Ganasangata Stuyamanatma Vaibhava. The summary of the war begins with the name Bandasuravadodukta Shakti Sena Samanvita. She who is surrounded by an army of Shaktis ready to go to war. Compared to the actual story of the war in the Lalitopakhyanam, what's presented in the Sahasranamam is basically like a top 10 or like an ESPN highlight reel. And that's really kind of the level we can get to today with the time we have, maybe just a little bit further. This army of Shaktis is nothing more than an extension of Lalitamba, of Parashakti herself, taking this form of an army. Nayagi, Nanmukhi, Narayani, Kai Nalina Panchashayaki, Shambhavi, Shankari, Shyamale Shadi Nachvayagi, Malini Varagi Shulini, Matangi என்று ஆயக்கியாதி உடையாள் சரணம் மரணமக்கே நாயகி நான்முகி நாராயணி கைலனில பஞ்சசாக்கி சாம்பவி சங்கரி ஷியாமளே சாதி நச்சுவாயாகி மாலினி வாராகி சூலினி மாதங்கி என்று ஆயக்கியாதி உடையாள் சரணம் மரணமக்கே. Like this, waves and waves of Shakti. Abhirama Bhattar, this is from Abhirami Andadi, just lists a few forms of Devi in this one shloka. But like this, waves and waves of Shakti come forth and form an army. Among those Shaktis, there are four very important ones. One of the Shaktis comes from Lalitamba's Ankusham. We saw that, Krodha Karang Kushojvala. From Ankusham, a Shakti comes. Sampatkari Samaruda Sindhuravraja Sevita. The Shakti named Sampatkari came forth with a horde of elephants. In those days, it was very common, the different levels, the tiers of soldiers, foot soldiers. And the next one we'll see from Lalitamba's Pasham Ragaswarupa Pashadya, Ashwaruda Dishtitashva Koti Koti Bhiravrata. The Shakti named Ashwaruda sprung forth with countless horses, Koti Koti Bhiravrata. So in those days, typically foot soldiers, horses, elephants, and then last but not least, usually the highest ranking or the leaders of the army will come in chariots. So then on the battlefield came three huge chariots. And actually in the Lalitopakhyanam, the measurements of these chariots is just astounding. Lalitamba came in the first chariot, Chakraraja Ratam, or the Shri Chakra Ratam, which held all of the weapons, Chakraraja Rataruda Sarvayuda Parishkrita. And behind her comes another important Shakti. Giti Chakrartastitayi, Giti Chakrartastitayi, Guru Guhanuta Shyamalagayi, Giti Chakrartastitayi, Guru Guhanuta Shyamalagayi, Giti Chakrartastitayi, Guru Guhanuta Shyamalagayi, Namaste, Namaste, Amba, Giti Chakrartastitayi, Guru Guhanuta Shyamalagayi, Namaste, Namaste, Amba, Giti Chakrartastitayi, Guru Guhanuta Shyamalagayi, Namaste, Namaste, Amba, Giti Chakrartastitayi, Guru Guhanuta Shagamalaye Namaste Namaste Ambagiti Chakra Prayatastitayagi Gītamritanaditaye Girvana Vaditaye Gītamritanaditaye Girvana Vaditaye Gītamritanaditaye Girvana Vanditaye Hatavishagasamugaye Kritalokopakaraye Hatavishagasamugaye Kritalokopakaraye Nata Bhairavadi Senaye Nava Nava Vida Bana Karaye Nata Bhairavadi Senaye Nava Nava Vida Bana Karaye Gap Madapa Gamardi Sa 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 Dani Sa Magamada Gamadapa Gamardi Sa 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 Dani Sa Magamada Gamadapa Gama Dapa Gamadi Sa Gamadani Sa 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 ma ga ma ri sa 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 ri sa ni sa da pa ma da ni sa ma ga ma ri sa ri ni sa da pa ma da ni sa da pa ga ma ri sa Giti Chakra Ratastitayi Guru Guhanuta Shamalaye Namaste Namaste Ambagiti Chakra Ratastitayi Geya Chakrataruda Mantrini Parisevita. The second chariot, Geya Chakram, sometimes known as Giti Chakram, came the Shakti Mantrini, the goddess Mantrini, a very important Shakti. Mantrini is also called Matangi, Raja Matangi, or Shyamala. She's known as the minister, the administrator of Lalitamba's kingdom. And actually, it's in Kalidasa Shyamala Dandakam. That stotram is actually about this form of Devi, this Mantrini, Raja Matangi. And then following up in the last chakra comes another very important Shakti. Dandanataya Rakshamaya Dandanataya Rakshamaya Dandanataya Rakshamaya Daityakula-dijita chaturaya Shri Dandanataya Rakshamaya Daityakula-dijita chaturaya Shri Dandanataya Rakshamaya Daitya Kula Dijita Chaturaya Dandanataya Rakshamaya Daitya Kula Dijita Chaturaya Shri Dandanataya Rakshamaya. Balda Sodara Vishukrahaya Balda Sodara Vishukrahaya Balda Sodara Vishukrahaya Balda Sodara Vishukrahaya बुधनुत गिरिचक्ररथ स्थितया बल्ड सोदर विशुक्रगरया बुधनुत गिरिचक्ररथ स्थितया चंडो चंड सेनारज्ञया चंडो चंड सेनारज्ञया चंडिकेशनुत गुरुगुगतरया चंडो चंड सेनारज्ञया चंडिकेशनुत गुरुगुगतरया दंडनाथया रक्षमा दैत्य कुलादि जीत चतुरया श्रीदंडनाथया रक्षमा गिरिचक्ररथारूढ़ दंडनाथा पुरस्कृता. In the third chakram, in the Giri chakram, came the Shakti Dandanatha. Dandanatha most commonly goes by the name Varahiaman, which we are fortunate to have today with us, or sometimes Vartali or Bodrini. Just to name a few, there is a Varahi Dvadashanamavali. It's a very powerful stotram. She is considered the Shakti in charge of punishment or dandane or justice. So these three chakras together are called the Radatrayam. So we have Shri Chakra Rajaratam, Gheya Chakram or Giti Chakram, and Giri Chakram called Radatrayam. And we'll see throughout Sahasranamam, Devi is personified in groups of three. Lots of her names are referring to patterns of things that come in three. Triambakam, Trinayanam, Tripuram, Tripureshi, Tripurashri, Tripurasundari. Trai, she has a name Trai, Trikonantara Deepika. Like there's so many names pertaining to the number three or groups of three. And they can all be boiled down to a few things. It can be boiled down to the Trigunatmika, Rajasa, Sattvam, Tamasam, the three gunas, or the three main functions of the world, Shrishti, Sthiti, Layam, and so forth. And we'll see this. But here she comes in the Radatrayam. The next Tiranamam, Jwala Malini Kakshipta Vanhi Prakara Madhyaka. At the request of the three head Devis, the Shakti Jwala Malini built a protective parameter made of fire around the camp. So you see, Jwala Malini is really the first security expert. She built the first ever firewall. Even before modern day cybersecurity, she came up with the first ever firewall. So think about that, how many thousands of years ago that idea was already there. Banda Sainyavadhojukta Shakti Sena Samanvita Nitya Parakramaatopa Nirikshana Samutsuka. Lalitamba gives energy and power to the army of Shaktis, and she is delighted in their valor as she watches them fight. And as she watches the war rage on, suddenly she hears a small voice that says, Amma, I too want to fight. She searches the camp looking for where the voice comes from. Chinna chinna adi edutha balani varai jal jal endra maniyolikka balani varai chinna chinna adi edutha balani varai jal jal endra maniyolikka balani varai chinnavale sundari kaniyudane varai கழ்த்திராத பார்த்த என் கவலை தீர்க்க வாராய் சின்னவளே சுந்தரி கனியுடனே வாராய் கழ்த்திராத பார்த்த என் கவலை தீர்க்க வாராய் சின்ன சின்ன அடியெடுத்த பாலா நீ வாராய் ஜல் ஜல் என்ற மணியொலிக்க பாலா நீ வாராய் வெண்ணையுண்ட கண்ணனவன் சோதரியே வாராய் கருணையோடு காத்திடவே நிமிழி நின்றவாராய் வெண்ணையுண்ட கண்ணையவன் சோதரியே வாராய் கருணையோடு காத்திடவே நிமிலி நின்றவார அமிர்தமும் மகிமைகளே பாடிடுவேன் வாராய் மகிமைகளே பாடிடுவேன் வாராய் அன்னை போல நடை நடந்து அழகு நீயும் வாராய் அமிர்தமும் மகிமைகளும் பாடிடுவேன் வாராய் அன்னை போல நடந்து அழகு நீயும் வாராய் சின்ன சின்ன அடியெடுத்த பாலா நீ வாராய் ஜல் ஜல் என்று மணியொலிக்க பாலா நீ வாராய் சின்ன சின்ன அடியெடுத்த பாலா நீ வாராய் ஜல் ஜல் என்று மணியொலிக்க பாலா நீ வாராய் பாலா நீ வாராய் பாலா நீ வாராய். Devi sees none other than her own young daughter Bala, the young child goddess, anywhere between ages 5 and 9, it says in the texts. She's standing eagerly in front of Lalitamba, ready to fight. Amma, I want to go to fight this little girl. Though worried, Lalitamba takes a piece of her own armor and dresses Bala and puts the tilakam on Bala's forehead. Mantrini and Varahi agree to go alongside Bala to keep watch. So with Bala leading the way, they head to battle. To everyone's surprise, Bala fought with great veracity, volleying arrows in all directions, and in one swoop she took down all of Bandasura's sons. With great excitement, Mantrini and Varahi rushed back to the camp, rushed back to Lalitamba to report the events of the day. Upon hearing about the valor of Bala, Lalitambika becomes elated. Bandaputra vadojyukta Bala Vikrama Nanditam. My Bala, she fought like this. Yen Bala ipdiyo ivlo alaga shanda potala na avalukku sandosham. As the war rages on, Mantrini takes one of Bandasura's brothers, Vishangan, as we saw in the Kriti. Hatta Vishanga Samohayai Mantrinyamba Virachita Vishanga Vadatoshita. She kills Vishangan, and in the meantime, Varahi takes on the other brother, which we saw in the other Kriti. Banda Sodara Vishukraharaya Vishukra Pranaharana Varahi Virinandita. I want to take a second and step back, and now that we have all this, and look at those two kritis we just heard back to back, Giti Chakra Ratastitaya and Dandanataya Rakshamam. These are both Samashti Charanam or shorter kritis of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar, who, as I've mentioned before, is a big Devi Upasakar, a Sri Vidya Upasakar. The reason I sang these songs today is one, not just to highlight these Devis, but to highlight Dikshitar's accomplishments in Sangeetam and bringing forth texts and bringing forth some of these esoteric concepts in the form of Sangeetam. Typically, when we hear about Lalitamba or when we sing songs on Devi Lalitamba, we don't really hear about Mantrini, we don't really hear about Varahi. They're very specific. Outside of things like Dwadash Namavalis or Shyamala Dandakam. Rajamatangi more so, in times Rajamatangi is personified as Meenakshi as well. Dikshitar in his Meenakshi kritis often calls her Rajamatangi, Shyamala, but not so much Varahi. But being a Sri Vidya Upasakar, being a big Sangeeta Jnani, what he has done is he has basically taken the Sri Vidya, the Lalitopakhyanam, and there's lots of other kritis you can see, and he breaks it down into more digestible kritis. So this Samashti Charanam kriti is only 4 or 6 lines on each of these Devis. It gives us a good introduction. It gives us a good summary of who they are. And it's just another way that Dikshitar's genius shows. And again, if I get started on Dikshitar, it's going to be a whole new satsang. So I'll keep moving on. But I just wanted to highlight that point. Angered with the death of his sons and brothers, Bandasura takes a large stone or a tantra and draws a diagram on it called a yantra and infuses it with a mantra and creates the Jaya Vigna yantra. He hurls it into the camp above that wall of fire, so it goes up and over and it falls into the camp. The minute it does that, the yantra takes its effects on the Shaktis. The Shaktis become dejected, and a great sense of depression overcomes them. They throw their weapons to the ground and they stand helpless, lamenting their fate. Oh, we're not going to win this war. Oh, we might as well give up. All of this just comes over all these Shaktis. Lalitamba thinks about what to do and immediately knows the answer. She looks beyond the battlefield and sees Kameshwara watching. The instant she looks at his face, a form appears on the battlefield. Mushikavagana modaka hastashyam chamara karna vilamvita sutra vamana rupa maheshwara putra vigna vinayaka pada namaste gajananam bhuta ganati sevitam kavitta jambu palasara pakshitam Umasutam shoka vinashakaranam namami Vigneshwara pada pankajam. Kameshwara Mukaloka Kalpita Shri Ganeshwara. Mahaganesha takes form and looks at the Jaya Vigna Yantra. He takes a running start and charges at it, and with one of his tusks turns the stone into dust. Mahaganesha Nidbinna Vigna Yantra Praharshita. We've seen this when talking about Ganesha. Ganesha is Vigna Vinayaka. No one else can remove obstacles. That's why the Jaya Vigna Yantra had to be destroyed by Ganesha. With his sons and brothers vanquished, it was time for Bandasura to go face to face with Lalitamba herself. We see this in most wars. The leader of the armies are always the last to fight. Even with Ravana, only after Kumbhakarna and only after Indrajit were slain did Ravana himself actually come and fight Rama. When looking at the battle between Bandasura and Lalitamba, though not mentioned in the Sahasranama, it's important to look at the type of weapons that were used. They didn't fight with traditional weapons, tridents, swords, maces, bow and arrows, spears, none of those things, right? He fought with astras and mantras aimed at Devi and the army of Shaktis. And for anything that Bandasura threw, Devi threw an equal but opposite astra to counter it. That's why Banda Surendra Nirmukta Shastra Pratyastra Varshini. That's all it says in the Sahasranamam about this. You know, in those very old Indian movies, you'll see these war between gods and demons, and the demons will throw a weapon. It'll fly in the screen, held by a little string. The god will throw a weapon. It'll fly in the opposite direction, held by a string. The two weapons will collide. In the middle, they will fall. They'll just fall down like that. But you can think about that. For example, Bandasura uses the Andhastra, which inflicts blindness. So Devi counters it with the Chakshushmatastra, which endows sight. Bandasura uses the Andhagasunanastra, which inflicts death. So Devi counters it with the Mahamrityunjayastra, which conquers death. Bandasura uses the Bhayastra, which inflicts fear. So Devi counters it with the Abhayastra. So like that Mohastra, Amohastra, like this back and forth, they use these astras and mantras. Now, the next Tirinamam is a bit unusual sounding and may seem a little curious in the context of this battle. Karangunina Akotpanna Narayana Dashakritihi. She who begat the 10 avatars of Vishnu from the tips of her fingers. What do the Dashavataras have to do with Bandasura and Lalitamba? Dashavatars are Vishnu's avatars. What do they have to do with Lalitamba? It is said that during the battle, whilst releasing all these astras, Bandasura also dispatches many asuras as well in the form of astras, and these are asuras like Hiranyakshan, Hiranyakashipu, Mahabali, Kartaviryaarjunan, Ravanan, Narakasuran, etc. These names should all sound pretty familiar. So in order to vanquish these demons one by one, Lalitamba sent out Vishnu in various forms, the god of protection. She sends him out in each of these forms from each tip of her fingers. And in the Lalitopakhyanam, it says exactly which finger corresponds to which Dashavataram. We don't need to go into that right now. But one thing to keep in mind while listening to these stories and is the perspective. In our Sanatana Dharma, we have what's called Shan Matam, the 6 kind of sects of religion, depending on which god we put at the top, which god we consider the most important. We have Ganapatyam, Ganesha, Skandam, Muruga, Kartikeya, Shaivam, Shivan, Vaishnavam, Vishnu, Shaktam, which is Devi, and Shauram, which is Suryan. So these stories were written, each of the stories, things like Lalitopakhyanam, Srimad Bhagavatam, Shiva Puranam, these are written from perspectives of people who have put that god forth as the most important. So here, Lalitamba is the most important. So from her, everything happens from Lalitamba. That's why even Dashavatarams, though a form of Vishnu, are an extension of Lalitamba. It's a completely different story of the Dashavatarams if you look in something like Srimad Bhagavatam or Vishnu Puranam, because that's from a Vaishnava standpoint. This is a Shaktam standpoint, and you'll get a different story from a Shaivam standpoint as well. So just keep that in mind. That's not to say any of these stories is right or wrong. It's just all of this happens simultaneously in the universe, in the Devaloka. It's just a matter of how we perceive it and how we choose to follow it. So then Lalitamba releases the Pashupatastra and destroys Bandasura's entire army. Mahapashupatastragni Nirdagdasura Sainika. And with one final astra, she takes out Bandasuran and burns down his kingdom of Shunyaka. Kameshwarastra Nirdagdasa Bandasura Shunyaka. With the Kameshwarastra, she takes out Bandasura and his kingdom. Now it's a Shunyaka is a funny word. Shunyam by itself means nothing, zero. So his kingdom is called Shunyaka, but Shunyaka also means everything. So she takes everything, his whole kingdom, and reduces it to zero as well. Shunyaka. Upon completing this wondrous feat, all of the gods and demigods, and they actually say, because we saw Hiranyakashipu mentioned, right? So actually even Prahladan is mentioned there. So Prahladan also is included. Prahladan, Naradan, Indran, Brahma, Vishnu. They all began to praise Devi. Brahma, Upendra, Mahendradi, Deva Samstuta Vaibhava. Mata Jaya Om Lalitambikaye Mata Jaya Om Lalitambikaye Mata Jaya Om Lalitambikaye Kattum Teliyar Kade Gatiyam Kanmudi Nadin Kanavanatavam Petrum Teriyar Dilayan Milavam Peragum Pirayen Pesataguvam பற்றும் வைரப்படை வாழ்வயிரம் பகைவர்க்கமனாக எடுத்தவளே வற்றாதகருச்சுனையே வருவாய் மாதா ஜெயவோம் லலிதாம்பிகையே மாதா ஜெயவோம் லலிதாம்பிகையே மாதா ஜெயவோம் லலிதாம்பிகையே மாதா ஜெயவோம் லலிதாம்பிகையே மாதா ஜெயவோம் லலிதாம்பிகையே. Like this, they praise Devi. Before going into the last name of today's satsang, I want to circle back to the 4th Tiranama in Lalita Sahasranamam, Chit Agni Kunda Sambhuta. We took this name to be the how of Lalitamba. How did she come forth? One who comes forth from the fire of ultimate consciousness. We saw earlier that Lalitamba actually emerged from Indradeva's yajna on the side of the Himalaya mountains. So why not say Indragni Kundam or Himachala Kundam or something like that? Why Chit Agni Kundam? And this actually speaks to the nature of all the battles and wars we see in our stories, our Puranas, our Itihasas. Be it this one, Mahishasuramardini, Shurasamharam, Ravanamardanam, Kurukshetra, and so on. It's not a question of whether or not these happened, but what's more important is actually what they represent. Some people say, did Ravana really have 10 heads? You know, how were they? Were they in a line? Were they in a stack? Were they in a circle? That doesn't matter. What matters is what those 10 heads represents, those 10 values, evil qualities that he possessed in excess, manifested and appeared as though he had 10 heads, and so on. So for example, Kurukshetra is essentially a clash between dharma and adharma, to which Krishna gives us a guide in the form of Bhagavad Gita. So if we just dive a little bit into the war between Bandasuran and Lalitamba, we can see what each part represents. We already saw that he fought with kind of unconventional weapons, right? He fought with astras and mantras that inflicted things like blindness, dumbness, laziness, fatigue, thirst. And for each of these, Devi countered it, saving her Shaktis, her army, her children. Bandasura is a combination of the ashes of the god of desire, Kama, and Shiva's anger, Krodha. When desire and anger takes over us, are we not afflicted with things like this? Are we not afflicted with blindness, dumbness, thirst? When we're so consumed in pursuing our desires, when we pursue our desires with this angry vengeance, we forget about things, right? So we forget about drinking, we get thirsty. We're kind of dumb to the world around us in our pursuit of these desires. We're blind, we're myopic to whatever else is around us in a pursuit of these desires. But if we put our faith and devotion in Devi, she will come from our consciousness, our Chit Agni Kundam, and give us the necessary means to conquer anything. This is going to be a reoccurring theme in the subsequent names in the Lalita Sahasranamam, this internalization of Devi. There's two schools of thought, Samayacharam, Kaulacharam. We don't need to go into that, but basically what it means is the external worship of Devi versus the internal worship of Devi. Both are equally good, both have equal merits. It's just a matter of how we perceive it. So in the last satsang, perceiving the form of Devi, that swarupam of Devi, and now looking at her story, that's all very external. We're picturing Devi externally. But what the next step is to picture that internally. What does that mean for us? And then who is that child Bala that fought? Bala is Lalitamba's daughter, her child. And in fact, in all the Tirunamams, we already saw in the first Tirunamam, Mata, she is the mother of everyone and everything. So are we not Lalitamba's children? We are Bala. If we so choose to take on our own battles, Bala was so eager to fight. Devi will give us her armor, her tilagam, her blessing, and watch happily as we fight. And then, when we can go no further, she will finish the job for us. So these battles that we hear and read about are not just one-time occurrences. Ravana didn't just die once. Narakasuran didn't die once. Kurukshetra didn't just happen once. They represent the struggles and the obstacles that we face over and over and over again in our lives, be it yearly or every 5 years or sometimes every day. So, and that's one thing to keep in mind. துன்பம் துடைத்தேன் தூய நெறியிலே, துன்பம் துடைத்தேன் தூய நெறியிலே, துன்பம் துடைத்தேன் தூய நெறியிலே, இயல்பமான உன் இசைகள் பாடவே, இயல்பமான உன் இசைகள் பாடவே, மனத்தாமரை மேல் என் தாயே உன் மலர்த்தாளினை வைத்தருள்வாயே, மனத்தாமரை மேல் என் தாயே உன் மனத்தாளினை வைத்தருள்வாயே, மனத்தாமரை மேல் தன்மயமாக்கும் தவ வழியறியேன், தன்மயமாக்கும் தவ வழியறியேன் தர்மமும் தியாகமும் சிறிதும் தெரியேன் தன்மயமாக்கும் தவ வழியறியேன் தர்மமும் தியாகமும் சிறிதும் தெரியேன் சின்மய ரூபிணி சிவை மனோன்மணி சின்மய ரூபிணி சிவை மனோன்மணி சின்மய ரூபிணி சிவை மனோன்மணி வர்மமில்லாமலே வல்துதவனியே சின்மய ரூபிணி சிவை மனோன்மணி வர்மம் இல்லாமலே வல்துதவனியே மனத்தாமரை மேல் தாயே உன்னின் மனத்தாளினே வைத்தருள்வாயே மனத்தாமரை மேல். This is another beautiful composition of my Parampara Paramaguru Sri G.N. Balasubramaniam, where he says, Varmamillamale Vandudavaniye Tunbam Tudaithen Tuya Nilayile En Manat Tamarai Mel. In times of distress, won't you come help me? Won't you place your foot on the lotus in my mind? Another, just a beautiful one of his very few Tamil compositions where he describes the internalization of this Devi worship. I'll wrap up today's satsang with the Tiranamam that we started with, Haranetragni Sandagda Kama Sanjeevan Aushadhi. As all the Devas praised Lalitamba, Rati, the wife of Kamadeva, approaches Lalitamba. Rati was disheveled, laden with grief, her eyes just pouring tears. So through watery eyes and with a quivering voice, she beseeches Lalitamba to restore her husband. Devi, looking at Kameshwaran, Shivan was the one who destroyed Kamadevan. So she looks at Kameshwaran for permission first, and then in her infinite grace, with one look, restores Kamadevan. Another reason she's called Kamakshi, Kamadayini. She restores Kamadevan to his previous splendor. That's why Dikshidhar says, Rakasha Shivadane Suradane Rakshita Madane Ratna Sadane Shri Kanchini Vasane Surasane Shringara Shrayamandagasane Ekaneka Akshari Bhuvaneshwari Ekananda Amritakari Bhaskari Ekagramano Hari Shri Kari Ekambresha Griheshwari Shankari Kanchadala Yadakshi Kamakshi Kamala Manogari Tripura Sundari Kanchadala Yatakshi Kamakshi Rakshita Madane, one who restored Kamadevan. Though with his physical body destroyed, right? We saw the ashes, though they were there, they were then destroyed as with Bandasuran. The form of Kamadevan was only visible to Rati. So that's why Kamadevan has the name Anangan, one without limbs, one without a form. But Rati was beyond satisfied with this. She had to be with Kamadevan. So as long as the form was visible to her, she was satisfied. Lalitamba then gives Kamadeva her blessing that with her grace, he would become even more powerful than ever, even so much as to conquer Shiva himself. Because the last time, that's why he burned in the first place. He was unable to conquer Shiva. But now with Lalitamba's grace, he could conquer Shiva and set in motion the events that lead to the birth of Kartikeya. That's why I said that this story, this Lalitamba, is kind of like a divergent story, right? It comes from the burning of Kamadevan, and then it comes right back to Kumara Shambhavam. And actually, the summary of Kumara Shambhavam is given within Lalitopakhyanam itself. And some say that since Kamadeva had no physical form, what Lalitamba does is she takes his sugarcane bow. So that sugarcane bow with the string of beads is actually originally a weapon of Kamadevan, along with the 5 arrows of flowers. So she takes the bow and the arrows from him as a symbol that she would give him the power to conquer all. So like I said, this Haranetragni Sandagda Kama Sanjeevana Shati, Kama Devan is inherently tied to Lalitamba. This form of Kamadevan, Kamakshi, Lalitamba. So that's why we see all these parallels between Kamadevan and Lalitambika. So, bhaktas and devotees, what I'd like to do before concluding this satsang today is just give a quick recap of what we've done, which is actually we're not very far into the Lalita Sahasranamam, but we've looked at her Swarupam, her divine form, her Nagaram, her Vasam, her place, her abode. And then now we've looked at her war with Bandasuran, her purpose for taking Avataram. But her purpose doesn't just end with Bandasuran. She doesn't just kill Bandasuran and go away. Lalitamba stays forever. And what we'll see then in subsequent names is all of the other things Lalitamba represents, all of the other things she does. My goal is to probably recap them in a very songs. We won't be able to go name by name through each very beginner level, just highlighting the names that really are important to that level, important to us right now in our day-to-day lives. So with your permission, I'd like to do that for the next approximately 2 satsangs, I would say. I'm going to conclude with a bhajan by another big freedom fighter, Devi Upasakar, who actually in one of his songs refers to Kali Devi as being the fall of the Soviet. He says, Rusyanaatil Kali Devi Kan Pattal. How, and we'll look at that in another name, Sahasrakshi. Devi is everywhere. She's looking out everywhere. It's not just India. Wherever her bhaktas are, be it India, America, England, France, wherever, actually all over the world is her child. Wherever Devi is, she is there to protect. She is there to restore balance, restore good, restore light. So I'll end with this song by the big Devi Bhaskar freedom fighter, Shri Subramanya Bharatiyar, Mahakavi Shri Subramanya Bharatiyar. Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om Parashakti, Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om. Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om Shakti, Om. Ganapati Rayan Avanir Kalai Pidittiduvom. குணமுயர்ந்திடவே விடுதலை கூடி மகிழ்ந்திடவே ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் பராசக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சொல்லுக்கடங்காவே பராசக்தி சூரத்தனங்கள் எல்லாம் வல்லமை தந்திடுவாள் பராசக்தி வாழ என்று துதிப்போம் ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் பராசக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் வெற்றி வடிவேலன் அவனுடைய வீரத்தினை புகழ்வோம் காற்றினில்லாதே போல் பகையே துள்ளி வருகுதுவே ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் பராசக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் தாமரை பூவினிலே சுருதியை தனி இறைந்துடைப்பாள் பூமணி தாளினையே கனிவுற்று புண்ணியம் எய்திடுவோம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் பராசக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். பாம்பு தலை மேலே நாதன் செய்யும் பாதத்தினை புகழ்வோம். மாம்பழ வாயினிலே குழலிசை வன்மை புகழ்ந்திடுவோம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் பராசக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். செல்வ திருமகளே தினம் கொண்டு சிந்தனை செய்திடுவோம். செல்வமெல்லாம் தருவாள் நமதோடு திக்குமெல்லாம் பரவும். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் பராசக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஓம் சக்தி ஓம் சக்தி ஓம். ஹர ஹர பார்வதி பதையே நமக. ஹர ஹர மகாதேவ. ஸ்ரீ லலிதா திரிபுர சுந்தரி தேவி கி ஜெய். ஆதி பராசக்தி கி ஜெய். ஸ்ரீ குருப்யோ நமஹ. நமஸ்காரம். Thank you.